Sunday program, our Sunday love feast, as Srila Prabhu had entitled it. And I'm just hoping. Yeah, so welcome to our, what day are we today? 12? 7 from 12 is 5. Okay, so it's our second Sunday program of the new decade, of which we hope there'll be at least another 48 or 49 for the whole year. Yeah, so thank you very much, Prabhu, for your very nice chanting. We'll chant a little bit more. Hey, Hare Krishna, thank you very much. Thank you. We'll chant a little bit more. It's funny, I was reading something during the week about an increase in society all round, actually, throughout all ages of society, but particularly with children, actually, with younger children. An increase in bullying in schools, just in society in general, but an even bigger increase, as I say, with children. And without getting into the whole psychology of bullying, because, you know, essentially we come to this material world, on all levels, actually, it's a pretty scary place, and even subconsciously we try to adjust ourselves in certain ways to protect ourselves. So even people who actually engage in that activity of bullying, in essence, they are kind of protecting themselves. That's not very good for the people that they're bullying, of course. It's not a justification. But that, in essence, is what's taking place. People are just trying to build a protective wall around them that nobody can penetrate, you know, because it's just the nature of the anxiety that we experience in this material world. But when I read that, I was thinking that as a kid, when I was growing up, one of the famous, I'm looking around the audience and seeing some people of a similar vintage as myself, and I'm thinking that you'll probably remember this one. Maybe even some of the younger people are familiar with it. But there was this little verse or little rhyme that we had, and the rhyme was, "Sticks and stones
break your bones, but names will never hurt you."
But names will never hurt me, yeah. So we used to, you know, I guess even the wording, sticks and stones may break my bones, but names will never hurt me. So we were preaching to ourselves about that, you know, to overcome that, if you like. But actually it's not true. It's not true at all. You know, sticks and stones may well break your bones. That's true, that part is true. But names, and by saying, but names will never hurt me, the names mean negative names. You've been criticized and called bad names like that. That will never hurt me. But of course that does hurt, and arguably, it hurts even more than the sticks and the stones. The sticks and the stones stop after a certain period of time. The wound will heal. But psychological bullying and psychological harassment may not, or may take a lot longer like that. So that came into my mind then when I was coming here today, and thinking that there's something negative about us and criticizes us, depends on how severe that criticism may be. But generally speaking, it does hurt, and we actually feel something in our mind and our body. You'll feel maybe anxiety. You'll feel maybe that other phrase that we have, you know, butterflies in your tummy. You may feel that kind of sense of unease and that sense of vulnerability, like that. So these things very much do actually affect us. But then on the positive, I was thinking that some people, sometimes they will think, or they will even ask, and whatever, challenge maybe, that, you know, you chant Hare Krishna, you chant this mantra. How can chanting a few names, and of course in the Hare Krishna mantra we have 3 names, Hare, Krishna and Rama. How can chanting a few names be beneficial or be positive. But if you equate it with when someone says something negative towards us as having an actual tangible effect on our mind and our body, indeed, in some cases, when the article that I was reading, it actually leads to people taking their own lives, because people say something negative about them. The negative repercussions or consequences of that can lead to somebody actually taking their own life. So you just flip the coin over and say, from a positive perspective, if you say something nice to somebody, if you appreciate somebody, appreciate something that they've done, that can have a very positive and warming feeling on us, and make us feel good about ourselves, and almost certainly won't lead to negative things like suicide or whatever. So words actually are very, very powerful. The words that we speak are very, very powerful. And then, what to speak of a spiritual sound vibration? How much even more potent a spiritual sound vibration can be on us personally and on our whole existence from time immemorial like that. And it's described that this particular mantra, and just as a matter of interest, is there anybody in the room who is here for the first time? You're here for the first, but it's not your first time to a Hare Krishna center, right?
First time.
Oh, first time. Wow, you're very welcome. What's your name?
Dej.
Dej. You're very welcome. Welcome to our Krishna temple here in Dublin. So I don't know how much you know about the Hare Krishna movement, but then I will just go through the mantra. So as I said, this mantra has 3 words. The first word, Hare, is like an invocation. It's actually referring to the energy of the Supreme Person, and it's kind of like an invocation and a kind of request to be able to chant the other 2 names in as nice and sincere and genuine a way as we possibly can. And the word Krishna simply means the most beautiful, all-attractive person. So this person is all attractive. Everything about this person is attractive. We all have attractive features, but we probably all can identify some less attractive features that we might have. If we weren't able to identify less attractive features that we have, the whole cosmetic industry wouldn't exist. So I think we can all identify that we have some less attractive features like that. But as it relates to Krishna, the Supreme Person, every single aspect of Krishna's personality and Krishna's being is attractive. There is nothing that isn't attractive. Krishna doesn't need to go to a beauty salon. So that's what Krishna means. And then Rama means the reservoir, or the storehouse, the reservoir or the storehouse of all pleasure, of all conceivable pleasure that we can have. So again, actually there's another nice phrase in Anandamayo Bhyasat, which it's Sanskrit phrase, which is stating that every single living being, so all of us in this room, all of us in this city, all of us in this country, all of us in this continent, all of us on this planet, all of us in this universe, and not just human beings, but also any creature that is born, that moves, that produces children or byproducts, and dwindles and dies. Any species that goes through those stages is Anandamayo Bhyasat, and that means they are eternally pleasure-seeking living beings. And that, of course, relates to every single one of us. We're all eternally pleasure-seeking. We want to be happy like that. So by chanting this name, and again going back to what I was saying earlier about the potency of words and how they can affect us both negatively and positively, this name it contains every conceivable pleasure, both material and spiritual, that we might want to benefit from. So this mantra is super powerful. It's a super powerful mantra. You're glorifying the all-attractive Supreme Being. And actually, from that perspective, it has no demarcation in terms of who you're glorifying. You're glorifying the Supreme Being. So whatever tradition we may come from, whatever ethnicity we may have, whatever religion we may follow, you're glorifying the Supreme Being. It's one of the wonderful things actually about these names, that they are descriptive of qualities. And being descriptive of qualities, they don't have boundaries, that it can only be a white person that has these qualities, or it can only be a black person, or it can only be a male person, or it can only be a female person, or whatever. It doesn't have any of those restrictions. It simply means the most beautiful or attractive person. So whether you come from a Christian background, or a Hindu background, or a Buddhist background, or an Islamic background, or a Jewish background, or whatever background somebody may come from, by chanting these names, Krishna just means the most beautiful or attractive person. So it's referring to that person, the supreme person. And there is only one supreme person, because you cannot have more than one supreme person, because that's a contradiction in terms. There is only one person that is supreme, like that. So it's applicable to all of us, whatever tradition or wherever we come from. Yeah, and then going back to the point about pleasure, we all want to be happy. We all want to be, we're all seeking pleasure, like that. Of course, this specifically, I did say it refers to any pleasure you can conceive of, but specifically it is referring to spiritual pleasure. And the reason that it refers to spiritual pleasure, and not just the reason it refers to spiritual pleasure, but the reason why that's significant for us, is that we are all eternal spiritual beings. So if we get some temporary material pleasure like that, the obvious one, let's say, is eating. We're hungry, we eat. But that in essence is a material pleasure. It's satisfying the hunger that we have. But in 4, 5, 6 hours time, 7 hours time, we will be hungry again, and we will have to eat again. So that pleasure that we're satisfying is only temporary, and it keeps needing to be fed like that. Whereas spiritual pleasure, when we access it and that we're benefiting from spiritual pleasure, it's constant and eternal. It never ceases. It never stops, so as that we have to seek it again. Once we seek it, connect with it, and are suitable and qualified recipients of it, it never ever stops. And we don't have to seek it again. That seeking of pleasure is then concluded. We've concluded that seeking of pleasure like that. Whereas in the material world, no matter how much pleasure we get that's based on the material platform, we will constantly have to go back and seek that pleasure again. It never satisfies us. It always needs to be topped up, if you like, just like your mobile phone credit. Okay, so that was a little introduction to chanting the mantra. So I'll just chant a little bit for a few minutes more, and then say a few more words, and then if anybody has any questions or comments that they'd like to offer in the pursuit of spiritual happiness, you are most welcome to ask those or give those comments. Okay, let's see. I was sensing this wasn't playing my comfortable level, but anyway, we will. That's right, it's much too high.
You can change more down. You want to check it?
Well, even if I go down, let's try that. I'm looking to my left when I'm doing this because we have three, sorry, we have 3 musical people to my left here. We may have more musical people, just that I'm not aware of. Okay. We'll get there. The problem for me now is I can't go down any further. I've reached the end of the scale. Oh, that's terrible. Is that one moving?
Sure, I don't think
Let's go around.
actually.
I'm wasting time.
Hare
Ki Jayate, Shri Krishna Sankirtan Ki, Srila Prabhupada Ki. So I hope we all feel better after chanting that most positive of all positive sound vibrations. And we don't feel like it was sticks and stones. Okay, so I'll just speak for a little bit longer because we're already 4:15. How time flies when you're having fun chanting Hare Krishna. Yeah, so in essence, this chanting of Hare Krishna is the yoga process that Krishna recommends to us in the Bhagavad Gita, which I'm sure is just there, which I can't stretch to, but it's there. Bhagavad Gita. So that's the yoga process that Krishna recommends. Actually, there's a very good reason for that, by the way, which I could have touched on before. But obviously, the chanting of mantras is based on sound, and sound, even as a material element, is the most subtle of all the 5 material elements, like that. We have earth, water, fire, air, and ether, and each of those material elements is associated with a material sense. So earth is associated with smell. You can smell the earth, as all the farmers will tell you, particularly in the season of spring. If you go into the field in, March, April maybe, and you dig the ground. Yeah, maybe a little later in this part of the world, maybe even May. Anyway, you break the soil when the grass is starting to grow, and you break the soil, you lift up the earth that's underneath the grass, and you can smell it, You smell the earth. So smell is associated with earth. Earth, water. Water, what's associated with water? Taste. We can taste water. Krishna himself says in Bhagavad Gita, I am the taste of water. Of course, when you're taking your water out of lead pipes in Dublin that goes through a whole processing plant somewhere in Leakslip or whatever, then the taste of water isn't so noticeable. But if you go to a fresh mountain spring and literally running water, and you capture some of it and you drink it, particularly if you're thirsty, you really can taste water in that scenario. So earth, water, fire. Fire is related to sight. Without fire, without the sun, none of us can see. We may have eyes, but we won't be able to see because it's pitch dark like that. So earth, water, fire is related to sight. Earth, water, fire, air. Air is related to the sense of touch. We feel the wind blowing on our skin. So air and touch are connected like that. And then earth, and each of these elements are getting more and more subtle. So earth, water, fire, air. The most subtle of them is ether. And ether literally means space. That's what it means, the space that everything is contained in within the universal cosmos. And associated with space is sound vibration. If we have a space and we shout into that space, we get an echo. The sound echoes back to us like that. So sound is the most subtle of the 5 material elements, and because it's the most subtle of the 5 material elements, it's the closest to the metaphysical or the spiritual. It's the closest of those elements. So focusing on sound vibration or mantra meditation is the kind of closest and the most potent and efficient way for connecting to the next dimension, to the spiritual dimension like that. Krishna informs us that this chanting of Hare Krishna mantra is not just a form of yoga. I may have said a form of yoga. It's not just a form of yoga, but it's the topmost form of yoga. Some people will understand or consider yoga. Take that off. That's kind of somehow another. Some people will consider yoga or understand yoga to be maybe breathing exercises or asanas like that. Others may consider it to be an acquiring of knowledge and all of those types of things. But Krishna tells us in the Bhagavad Gita that the most real yoga, or topmost yoga, is actually reconnecting, because we already were connected, reconnecting with the Supreme Person. That's actual real yoga, to connect with the Supreme Person. He also goes on to say, about what we need to control in order to practice yoga. But just before I go to that, reconnecting with the Supreme, I just want to make a reference that some people might think, well, why do we want to do that? Why do we want to reconnect with the Supreme? And something else I was reading during the week about a personality that I've been associated with or connected with ever since my school days. My first schooling took place across the water in the UK. So when we did history, the history that I studied as a young child in school was the Tudor history, the House of Tudor. And of course the most famous member of the House of Tudor was Henry VIII. So I was reading something on him last week actually, and it was describing how from the age of 52 until he died, I'm not sure exactly how old he was, but he died in his 50s, he may be a few years later. But from the age of 52, Henry completely disconnected himself from society, and he literally didn't meet anybody or associate with anybody except his last wife. He had 6 wives, Henry, he was pretty active. And the little phrase is divorced, beheaded, died, divorced, beheaded, survived. That's how the wives went. So the first one he divorced, the second one he beheaded, the third one died, divorced, beheaded, died, the fourth one he divorced, divorced, beheaded, died, divorced, beheaded, the fifth one he beheaded again. So he beheaded 2, he divorced 2, one died, she probably was smart. Actually she died in childbirth actually, that one. So one died, 2 divorced, 2 beheaded, and the last one survived him. But the last one, I think her name was Catherine also, Catherine of Parr, she very much became 2 things: his nurse in his old age, because 52 or in your 50s in Tudor England was actually quite an old age, you know, people didn't live much beyond that. But also she became like a confidant of Henry's too. But it was really interesting because I'd never read that before, even though I know a little bit about the history. I'd never actually come across this point that was made in this particular article I was reading. That one of the reasons, or the main reason that Henry did that he cut himself off from society, and he literally everything, the only person he really connected with or associated with was that last wife. The reason that he did that is described that he was ashamed of his physical condition. He was developing, he was getting ulcers and sores on the external parts of his body, on his legs, his arms, etc., maybe even his face, like that. And he became incredibly ashamed of because, you know, he was a king, he was a powerful guy, you know, and all his life he'd been, you know, the kind of top man, so to speak, you know, but now his body was deteriorating like that. And he became ashamed of it, so he cut himself off. He didn't want anybody to see him, except, as I say, Catherine. And I was thinking about it that, you know, obviously in these situations you always have a certain empathy for anybody in those types of situations, but from a more taking a helicopter view, as they say, that new phrase that I've learned recently, taking a helicopter view of things, it's just a misidentification of who we actually are. First off, the body, even when it's young, it does horrible things, but it does things that are somewhat unpleasant, you know. You always know, I have 2 granddaughters, one of them is just sort of 6 months old, but you always know she's in the room when her nappy needs changed, you know. So even though she's young, she's only 6 months old and she looks very beautiful and cute and all of those kind of things, you know, and everyone, when they see a baby, they always go over and say, oh, it's a lovely baby, and everybody sort of goes a little gushy about babies, but they still do poos, you know, 10 times a day or whatever it is, waste a fortune on nappies. And other such things, like then you pick them up, you know, and you shake them, the next thing they gook all over you, you know, so yeah, they still do things that aren't so pleasant. So the material body is never really pleasant. It's kind of more pleasant when it's younger, a little more pleasant, but it's never really pleasant. So Henry, he was now an old man, at least for those times, and he became ashamed of his body. But that's just a misidentification for us, and I think it's a good thing, for me at least. It was just another angle for me to understand we are not these external temporary material bodies, and therefore, because we are not these external material bodies, there's never a need for us to be embarrassed or ashamed of the body. It's not us. It is not us. The only reason we would be ashamed or embarrassed is if we identify the body to be us. And likewise, if we're, you know, if we're very beautiful and intelligent and talented and we have all these different skills, there's no need for us to become proud of that either, because again, this is not us. It's not the real us. The real us is the eternal spiritual being dwelling within. So Krishna says that, and that's the reason why Krishna is saying that real yoga is to reconnect with the Supreme Personality of Godhead, because everything else is temporary, including this body. And we don't need to get embarrassed about it or ashamed about it like Henry did, because it's not us like that. And we don't need to give it so much attention and so much focus. Rather, we should focus on who we actually are, the eternal spiritual being living within. And then, reconnecting with Krishna, or reconnecting with the Supreme Person, the idea is that when we do that, when we actually reconnect to our real identity and reconnect to our real relationship, our most meaningful relationship, that then we can act on that platform, and then that, as I said earlier about satisfaction and pleasure, that's the eternal, our eternal situation, and we return to that eternal situation, and we never have to worry about anything temporary or anything material again. It's all over, it's finished, it's just something that we never even have to think about. We may have been here for billions of lifetimes, but once we go back to the spiritual world, we never have to consider it again. It's all over, it's gone, the bad dream is finished, it's over like that. So, whatever someone's conception of yoga might be, Krishna is telling us in the Bhagavad Gita that real yoga is reconnecting with him and reconnecting with our spiritual identity. In order to do that, Krishna goes on to tell us that we have to actually control our minds. That's a very important part of this yoga process, controlling the mind. The mind is kind of like I guess one example we could give, it's kind of like a television. And a television, particularly nowadays, when I was growing up, I remember when I was about whatever age it was, what age was I then? Anyway, whatever it was, you know, maybe 10, something like that. The first television set arrived on the street I was living in. You know, never before we'd never known what a television was. We'd heard it was coming, but we'd never known. And then the first television actually arrived. And when it arrived, it was black and white. That's the first thing. It was black and white. It started at, I think, 6 o'clock in the evening. It only started. And it finished at 9 or maybe 9:30 in the evening. So it was on for 3.5, 4 hours maximum every day. And there was only one station. So actually, if I was speaking back now in 1969, 70, this example wouldn't be so good. But of course, technology has advanced so much in the last 40 odd years, whatever it is. Now televisions aren't black and white, they're colour. They don't start at any time or finish at any time. They're 24/7, right? They never ever stop. And the other thing about them is there isn't just one station, there is a plethora is one way of putting it, you know. Because you can get the stations from all around the world now, right? You can get all the Indian stations here and Ireland, whatever. It's like, you know, it's like, you know, there's just thousands of these stations now. So the mind is kind of like if you think of it like a television, where the television set is receiving so many different signals from so many different places, and then you can choose what it is that you want to connect to. Like that. So you go into someone's house and they're watching, you know, BBC, you go into someone else's house and they're watching NDTV or whatever it is like that. So you choose what you want to listen to. So the mind is kind of like that. We choose, but whatever we listen to, sorry, just before I go on, whatever we listen to, we should be fully aware that we're influenced by that. We are strongly influenced by what we listen to, what we watch, what we take, what we actually decide to connect to. And that's why advertising works. These companies don't spend literally billions of dollars or euros or pounds or whatever. They don't spend billions of pounds, etc. on advertising if it didn't work. It works like that. So therefore, whatever we connect with influences us and has an impact on us like that. And Krishna also tells us in the Bhagavad Gita that if we connect with sensory pleasure, things connected to the senses that we were talking about earlier, eating, touching, tasting, seeing, like that, hearing. If we connect to temporary sensual pleasure, then actually, what Krishna says is, while contemplating the objects of the senses, one becomes attached to them. So while you're contemplating those objects, whatever they may be, your senses become attached to them. And the corollary of that is that even then, if we have something right beside us that is super precious and super important, we actually won't even see it or notice it if we have allowed our senses to be carried away by that lesser thing that we have associated with. There's that English phrase, birds of a feather flock together. Whatever we connect with and allow ourselves to be influenced by, we become affected by. The one example that's given is that if you take an iron rod, if you have an iron rod, now as it's on its own, it's just like an iron rod, that's what it is. If you put that into a boiling fire, if you have a big, I don't know, whatever, coal fire or something, and it's really, really hot, and you put the iron rod into that fire, within minutes, the iron rod has effectively become fire. When you take that out, you see it, it's red, raging red, like that. It's no different than the fire practically, and it certainly is if you feel it. So we get affected by what we associate with, like that. So Krishna tells us, don't connect to, don't allow the mind, don't allow your television set to tune into, just even if you take the material example, people will say, you know, I don't know what example to give now, but you know, people will say, you're much better off, I don't know, watching some culture program on BBC Two than some, you know, I don't know, some trashy soap or what's the other thing they call that? Reality TV. Like, you know, so even from a material level, differentiations are made between what we connect with and what we associate with. But Krishna says, no, you should put aside all of that material connection, all of that sensory pleasure, and you should just tune in to the eternal spiritual television station like that. And again, the reason being that if we do that, we then disconnect, we start the process, and actually that process can be a very quick process, but we start the process of disconnecting ourselves from the material world. And the advantage to disconnecting ourselves from the material world is that we don't have to return. And this material world has some fundamental problems with it. The first one is that we're born. The second one is that we grow older. The third one is that we have to accept diseases. And the fourth one is that we have to die. We have to leave these bodies, or what we know as death. So those four processes are not nice processes. They create, actually, we were talking earlier about name calling, creating anxiety. But those four processes create anxiety within the living entity. And the reason they create anxiety is because we are eternal. That is our constitutional position. We are eternal spiritual beings. And if you're eternal and you put yourself into a temporary situation, that is what we call a rasa basa, or an incompatible situation. It's incompatible. We're eternal. Now suddenly we find ourselves in a temporary situation, and we're faced with this prospect of death. That's what we're faced with, every one of us in this room. You know, it's like, it's you know, we all have to leave these bodies, what's known as death. But of course we don't die. As eternal spiritual beings, we don't die. And if we're on the platform of understanding who we actually are, the anxiety, the fear is completely removed. It doesn't exist anymore, because you know that you're not dying. You know. Actually, the founder of this movement is Prabhu above me? Yeah. The founder of this movement, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, and you can see this on video. You don't have to take my word for this. You can see this on video. Literally minutes before he dies, minutes before he leaves his body, he's lying on a bed, and he's surrounded by his devotees, or some of his devotees, and they actually have a microphone. They're holding a microphone to his mouth, and what he's doing is he's translating these books. That's what he's doing. He's literally minutes from leaving his body, and he's translating these books. And one of the last things that he says is the point that I'm making here, that we're eternal spirit souls, we're the eternal servants of Krishna. And he says that this consciousness is Krishna consciousness, or God consciousness, and ultimately it relieves all fear. Now, to be able to do that, literally, I don't know how many minutes it was a very short period of time before he then left, you know. It's an example of a person who fully understands that they're eternal spiritual being, and this body that they're still that they're in, that actually it has no relevance, it's of no importance whatsoever. But if you have that understanding, you eliminate your anxiety, you eliminate your fear. Now, most of us don't do that. Most of us kind of run away from that, we hide away from that, and whatever. But that's not solving our issue. It's not solving the problem, and the anxiety will still remain, and the anxiety will still increase like that. So anyway, Krishna tells us that the best thing that we can possibly do is tune our mind into the spiritual stations and focus on spiritual subject matters, of which actually there is no better practice to do that, or no better mechanism for doing that than the chanting of this particular mantra. And time that's another factor, because as time passes, and as our existence in this particular life, in this particular body, as it increases, that's another real phenomena about the material world and about time, that what was I going to say about time, is that the more that we want it, and as we get older, we kind of want more time, because nobody really wants to get to the point where they're leaving the body, you know. So you kind of want more time. You're hoping that you're going to get more time. Everyone, I see a lot of heads shaking in agreement with that. That's good. So we're looking for more time. But the funny thing is that as we get older, time becomes shorter. The sense of it running out becomes much more apparent to us and much more real for us. Young children, they can't understand these concepts. They literally can't understand these concepts, you know. And actually, for some of them, I can remember school. You're always wishing away time. You go into school at 9 o'clock in the morning, you think, God, I can't wait for 3 o'clock in the afternoon, you know, and you're just wishing these 6 hours away, you know. As you get older, that logic or reasoning completely changes, you know. It's like, please give me some more time, or whatever like that. It's like birthdays, you know, again with children, you know. I don't know. Little boy, is it? Little girl? Little girl? Little boy? Your wife said boy, you said girl. Now, you're going to be clear on this. Maybe you should go outside and have a discussion and come back. But anyway, how old are you? Are you probably a little bit too young actually for this question? But are you 2?
She's 2.5.
Right, okay. I wanted her to say that, because that's what you'll get with children. If you guess their age and you guess it a little younger than it is, they're very quick to remind you, you know. Again, with the 2 grandchildren, if you say to them, oh, you're 3 now. I'm 3.5. You know, you really make it fun. Now, if I say that to somebody in the room that I'm looking at, you know, and I guess your age, and I guess it the wrong way, I say you're older than you actually are, you know, it's the exact opposite. They want their birthday to come. Kids want there's birthdays to come. There's some time, it's hard to know what that time is, where they change their mind. You know, and it's hard to know, is it when they're 15, is it when they're 17, is it when they're 19? It's kind of hard, but it comes to every single child, just that they eventually learn there's no such thing as Mr. Claus, just in case there's anyone in the room that I don't want to damage there with that comment. So just as every one of them eventually comes to realize that, which is another whole subject in and of itself, that we impose upon them some mysterious character, you know, who they totally buy into because they get presents from. We're just gratifying their senses so as that we can see them smile and think we're wonderful for, you know. Anyway, that's a whole other discussion which I probably shouldn't have mentioned. But anyway, just as they all come to realize that he doesn't exist, they all come to realize at some point they don't want any more birthdays, or they don't want to be reminded of them, because now it's different. Now they're at a certain age when they're young, they want to be older to assert themselves, to feel that they're a real fully fledged member of society. But once they get to a certain age, then it's like, well, actually no, I don't even reminded of these birthdays anymore, you know. It's that, why? Because what's a birthday? A birthday is just telling you, you know, as famously sung by Pink Floyd, you're one day closer to death. You know, that's what you are. So time is this incredible elusive thing that we cannot control no matter what we do. And there's so many wonderful quotes in relation to time. Chanakya Pandit, who was a great Indian philosopher and thinker, he said, no matter how wealthy you are, you can have all the wealth of the universe. Can you imagine? I don't know what the wealth of the universe is, but we're talking, you know, zillions and zillions and zillions and zillions of dollars of wealth, you know. You can have all of that, but you cannot buy 1 single second of time with all of that wealth. Even Stephen Hawkins, the scientist chap who was in the wheelchair, he said, if time travel exists, why do we not see people from the future? Why are we not seeing people from the future coming and connecting with us? You know, I think he was an atheist actually, but he's making a good point about time, about controlling time and the whole thing. Chaucer famously said, "Time and tide waits for no man." You know, none of us can control time. We're all dictated to by time. Actually, Srimad Bhagavatam, I'll give you the last one. Srimad Bhagavatam says, by the rising and the setting of the sun, We are all one day older, and in that way we are controlled by time, because we cannot stop the rising and the setting of the sun. We cannot stop time, so we're getting older all the time. So we cannot control it. And what does time mean if we identify with the temporary material body? If we're thinking that that thing we see in the mirror in the morning when you're brushing your teeth, assuming you all brush your teeth, I hope that you all brush your teeth. That's another thing, as a kid, brushing teeth isn't a priority. The parents have to get them to brush the teeth and get them into the habit of brushing teeth, But when you get to our age and, every single day you go to eat something and this tooth hurts and that tooth hurts, and it's sensitive and this and that, you start to take tooth care a little bit more seriously. But when you're brushing your teeth in the morning and you're looking in that mirror and you're brushing, if you think the person that's reflected in the mirror, if you think that is you, then time is your enemy. Because every day you look in that mirror, you're one day older and one day closer to leaving that material body. But on the other hand, if you identify correctly with who you actually are, that you are the eternal spiritual being dwelling within the material body, and you are not this material body, time has no influence over you. You have controlled time. Something that people have been trying to do since time immemorial. They've been trying to control time unsuccessfully. But this is the secret to controlling time. Understanding who you actually are. That we're the eternal spirit soul. Because time does not exist on the spiritual platform. Because time is eternal. We as spiritual beings, the spiritual realm is eternal. Time does not exist. Therefore, it has no impact on us. It only has impact on us in the material world, and if we're in material consciousness, then it has impact on us. Other than that, it has zero impact on us. So there's another reason why we should want to properly try and identify with who we actually are, the eternal spiritual being. This is the advice of Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita. Even from the platform of logic, reason and argument, it makes perfect sense to be able to identify with who we actually are, rather than something that we are not. Okay, I will stop there. Does anybody, aside from this little boy or girl, does anybody else have anything to say? Oh, gone quiet. Look at that, it worked. once the attention is on. Does anybody have any questions or any comments? No. You're agreeing with the presentation. Okay, good. Of course, if you agree with the presentation, it means that you will chant Hare Krishna and never stop. Yes.
So I just want to clear it this whether we should identify with what we are or not.
Yeah, we should identify with who we are, the real us. Yeah. So, and the real us, as is given also by Krishna in Bhagavad Gita and various other places, that we are an eternal spiritual being. And that's who we should. And there is no compatibility between the real us, the eternal spiritual being, and the not real us, which is the temporary material body. Yeah. There is no compatibility. There is no well, basically, I suppose the way I should put it is you can't have both. Sometimes it's kind of like, we might engage in all sorts of activities in a material sense, whatever those may be. I mean, basically speaking, those activities, as you see in the material world, are what pleasures the senses. And actually, an interesting thing, the four things that devotees will avoid because they inhibit their spiritual progress, they inhibit their ability to really understand who we are. The four things that they will avoid is eating something that causes suffering to other living entities. Now, ironically enough, that is something that has really recently gained much resonance in the material world, and that's something that people are more and more able to identify with, that makes sense. When I was growing up as a kid, and I mean very few people identified with that, but now it actually has become kind of mainstream almost. But it is also interesting to note that Srila Prabhupada, as well as many of the other things that he did, and he did an amazing amount of stuff, one of the other things that he did was, he actually is the first person ever to create or found a chain of vegetarian restaurants. You know, it's kind of interesting. You know, he did that back in the 60s. So that's one thing that devotees will avoid. Eating things that cause suffering to others, because if you eat something that causes suffering to somebody in the process, you have to get karmic reaction for that. And karma, like time, only exists in the material world. So if you have to get karma, if you're due to receive karma, you have to come to this material world to receive it, because there's no such thing as karma in the spiritual world. So therefore, yeah, we try to avoid eating anything that causes suffering to somebody else. And then the other three, to quickly go through them, are intoxication, because intoxication completely compromises our ability to be able to see things as they are. I mean, you see that when people are intoxicated. That you know, some people can't find their way home. You know, they don't remember where they live. You know, or people do really crazy things when they're intoxicated. So intoxication compromises our ability to understand these finer subject matters. What was it? Gambling. Gambling is another one, because gambling is something that the Sanskrit word, the negative effect of gambling, the Sanskrit word is shvara, and shvara means we become feverish, just like you have a flu and you've got a fever. People, when they're gambling, they can get into this feverish thing. They just have to. And some people, you know, there's many examples of this. You know, that the wife of a husband, a letter will come through the door, and it will be a solicitor's letter telling her she has to move out of her house within 10 days because she no longer owns it, because her husband gambled it a few months earlier. He never told her, but he gambled it in a casino or something like that. So gambling creates this feverish mentality, and again, we cannot be peaceful like that. And the last one is uncontrolled sexual activity, because that also creates, in terms of the mind, it creates a kind of unclean mind like that. But if you look at the streets of any city in the world, if we go for a walk now, a little tour of Dublin, not tour, full tour, but let's walk down Abbey Street, let's walk down Capel Street, let's come back up Henry Street and back up O'Connell Street, okay? And what we should do, I'm deadly serious, not that we'll do it right now, but anyone wants to do this, you walk the block. You literally just walk around the block, okay? You count how many premises you pass. And let's say, to round it up, you pass 100 premises. I can give you a guarantee that 75% plus of those premises will be dealing in one of those four things. It may actually be even higher, actually. It may actually be even higher. But certainly 75%, they'll either be places where you gamble, where you eat meat, where you take intoxication, or where, you know, there's, actually I think Capel Street, there's a lot of sex shops on Capel Street, right? So it's probably a good block to walk to prove my point, you know. But I think you'll find at least 75%, maybe 80, maybe even 90% of the premises you pass will be engaged in those four activities. So we can understand that this material world is not designed for spiritual life. This material world is designed for material life, and by definition, if you succumb, if you like, to what the material world is selling us, you will just keep coming back. You have to keep coming back. Why? Because by engaging in those activities, you have to accept karma, and karma only exists in this world. So therefore, you have to keep coming back to burn your karma. What we've got to do is we've got to free ourselves from karma, and the way that we do that is we stop engaging in those four activities, we free ourselves from karmic reaction, and we put ourselves in a position to be able to go back to the spiritual world like that. Is that okay? For your,
As a devotee, we should try to refrain from the four distance as much as we can. We try to keep it.
yeah. And actually you'll find, you know, there's one great devotee who said, whenever his mind allows one of the thoughts of those four activities to enter, it becomes so distasteful to him that actually he has a physical and mental reaction to the distaste of those things. And that comes, now people, you know, most people in the material world love them, they think they're great, you know, it's kind of like, you know, everyone works, you know, not everyone, but people work Monday to Friday, and all they're meditating on is the weekend so they can go out, get drunk, whatever they do, you know. So people are meditating thinking these things are wonderful. But actually, once you start, well, first off, it's all based on knowledge, actually. Once you have knowledge and you understand the logical reasons why these things do not make sense, that's the starting point. And then once you engage in, or should I say not engage in those practices, very quickly, it actually doesn't take that long. Very quickly, you also start to develop a distaste for them. You know, so initially, well, there's one nice verse in Bhagavad Gita towards the end where it says, what is nectar in the beginning becomes poisonous in the end, and what's poisonous in the beginning becomes nectar in the end. So material sense gratification for most people is kind of like nectar, but actually the more you dive into it, the more poisonous it becomes. And if you take something like gambling, so you might have people who just go once every now and again and make a little bet, you know, but at the other end of the scale, you have people whose total lives are totally destroyed and they lose everything because of it. Intoxication, you may have somebody who goes for a pint of beer every once in a while, fine. The other end of the scale is go to any of the hospitals here in Dublin with people having liver transplants because they've destroyed their lives because of it. So what might appear to be nectar in the beginning quickly turns into poison. And likewise, when you first engage in spiritual life, that can taste a little bitter, a little poison, because it's such a change. You know, I can tell a personal story actually. When I first met the Hare Krishna devotees, and I was with them for just a few days or whatever it was, then I was asked would I go out traveling with a few other members, and the idea was we were distributing Bhagavad Gitas and distributing different literature like that, you know. So I thought, great, yeah, fantastic. So the very first night that we went out to do that, very first day, sorry, that we went, and we were traveling, and we were living in a van. And actually, in those days, the vans weren't so opulent, you know, they were quite basic. You know? So I remember waking up, we went to Tuam, actually, in County Galway, and we parked up, it was in the winter time, it was in December, and we parked in a car park in Tuam, and we slept in the van. I was woken up in the morning because, you know, the condensation was dripping on my face, you know, from the roof of the van, you know, and I was, you know, you had these sleeping bags that, you know, they have tog value now, right? And something is like, you know, 12 or 15 tog or whatever, and that's nice and snug and warm. I think the tog value of these sleeping bags that we had was maybe 1 or 2, you know, like you're shaking in your sleeping bag, being woken up by the drips coming down the van. And I was the new kid on the block. There was another 3 devotees with me in the van. I was a new kid on the block. And because I was the new kid on the block, I was told, oh, you have to get out first and have a shower. And by the way, this was very early in the morning. This was like sort of, 2 o'clock in the morning. This was like a really early start that we were having. So I'm woken up at 2 o'clock in the morning. The devotee in charge is telling me to get out of the van immediately, like that. I get out of the van. It had snowed overnight. So now we had like an inch or 2 of snow on the car park ground, like that. One of the other devotees had put a bucket of water outside the van the night before. That's what we were going to use to shower. That had a thin layer of ice on the top of it because it was so cold, you know. And of course, once the door of the van opened, then I was really hurried out because the cold air was coming into the other devotees in the van. So I said, get out, take a shower, get out. So I jump out, slam the door closed. Next thing, I'm in pitch dark, in bare feet, in snow. You know the way the snow sort of is like glue almost? Your feet feel like they're sticking to the tarmac ground. You know? So it's like 2 o'clock in the morning, pitch dark. You know, all I've got on is a gumshoe, just a thin little thing covering the lower half of my body. I've got a bucket of water with ice on the top, and a little bucket beside it to use as the scoop to, you know, shower myself. And I'm thinking to my mind, you know the way the mind works really, really quickly. I'm sitting there, I'm not standing actually, I'm sort of on my hunkers, you know, now. And I'm thinking to myself, what have I done? Mummy, I want to go home to Mummy. But you know, 38 years later, that all now is very a very happy feeling or a very nice kind of feeling, you know. But yeah, so the change can be a little poisonous in the beginning, but it very quickly turns to nectar. That's how spiritual life works. Material life is the other way. It may seem nectar in the beginning, but it very quickly turns poisonous like that, and particularly as we get older and our capacity to enjoy our senses reduces. That's another real dynamic as well. When you're young, your senses are strong and they're vibrant, and people, they go out and they party all night and whatever, that kind of thing, As you get older, it's like you don't have the capacity for that kind of thing anyway, Yeah. Thank you very much. Yes?
A person who's starting in spiritual life, are there any degrees?
Are there any?
Can we give like degrees as to how or in what path they are? Let's say, like where you said, like whether a person is going for a kind of class or something like that. But if he or she is maintaining that, can they justify it as being okay, or is it still not okay?
Well, the point is, if something isn't good, then even in so-called, because that is an argument that's made, that that they'll take in moderation, like that. But if something is not good, then whether you take it in moderation or not, it's still not good. You don't change the essential quality of what that is, like that. So you could make an argument to say, well, it's better to take less because it's not good, but it still doesn't mean that it's good. Why take something? And anything that is agitating our senses, that's engaging our senses in the wrong way, is ultimately something that will slow us down in terms of our spiritual path. It will slow us down. So you could make an argument that it's better to take less than more, but then the argument is still, why take anything? Because it's not a good thing, like that. And it does inhibit and slow us down on our spiritual path, like that. Thank you. Okay, I guess I should stop, right? We're 5 minutes to 5. And I'm now entering the territory of depriving everybody of the wonderful vegetarian feast that we will be serving as soon as I finish, or a little bit after. What we're going to do now is we will have what we call arti, and we'll stand for that. It will be chanting also, in front of the altar. And then after that, we will serve the feast. Right now, that's it. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Listen. Thank you all very much for coming. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you very much for clapping. And whatever you can do in terms of engaging in spiritual practice, please do it. It's just so much beneficial for you, for your family, for your friends, for all of your associates, for the city, for the country, for the universe. It just benefits absolutely everybody, but most of all yourself. So just engage in whatever way you can. And as I say, the best way possible is by chanting the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra. Srila Prabhupada ki Jai. Hare Krishna.